Hey there, and welcome to the Black Narrative, where every story echoes with soul, strength, and a whole lot of heart. Let's dive into today's tale. Judge Elena Grant stepped off her midnight blue sedan and climbed the granite stairs of the Magnolia County Courthouse just after 8 a.m. Her crisp olive suit and poised gait spoke of years at the bench, but beyond the revolving doors of justice, she was still seen as just another visitor. At the security station, veteran bailiff Darren Rhodes, broad-shouldered and stern behind mirrored shades, blocked her path. Without glancing at her federal ID, he barked, "Ma'am, step aside. You'll submit to a secondary screening." Elena's calm protest, "I carry proper credentials. I'm on my way to preside over today's docket," fell on deaf ears. Rhodes seized her portfolio and steered her toward a door marked, "Private Screening." A second guard, Alan Kim, hovered by the scanner, his nervous eyes betraying discomfort but not enough courage to intervene. In the windowless room beyond, a single steel stool waited beneath a harsh fluorescent light. Rhodes never asked permission. He simply guided her into the chair and snapped on a pair of electric shears. Elena's heart pounded as the blades buzzed against her silver coils. She opened her mouth to object, "This is unlawful." But the words died in her throat as fistfuls of her hair fell to the tiled floor. The guards jeered, one muttering, "She looks better like this." Rhodes brushed stray clippings from his sleeve and smirked, "Presentable now. You may go." He tossed her credentials on a nearby desk. Emerging back into the hallway, Elena's shoulders were squared, her expression impassive, her dignity intact though her hair was uneven stubble. With each echoing click of her heels toward the courtroom doors, her outrage settled into purpose. Darren Rhodes had thought he could humiliate another black woman. Instead, he had provoked the very person sworn to wield the law, and he would soon learn she was no victim. The corridor outside courtroom 1 fell silent as Judge Elena Grant pushed through the double doors, her uneven scalp catching the morning light. Lawyers, litigants, and reporters paused mid-conversation, jaws slackening as they recognized the woman they believed degraded, and assumed diminished, now striding behind the judge's bench in full judicial robes. Elena's robe fell over her shoulders like armor, her gaze was ice-steeled with resolve. At the front of the room, the court officer tapped his microphone. "All rise," he intoned. Even Bailiff Rhodes froze, his hand on the doorframe as though part of him still grasped that hallway triumph. Elena took her seat, the gavels would side beneath her hand. "Be seated," she said, voice flat and final. Minutes earlier, she had ordered a recess, firing the first shot in her own courthouse. Now she called the morning's first witness, Sergeant Marcus Flynn, testifying in a police misconduct hearing. Flynn, a stocky man with a whistle in his collar, had pushed an unarmed veteran during last year's demonstration. Under direct questioning, he admitted his team used non-lethal crowd control that left ribs broken. Elena's pen hovered as she noted his stammered defense. Protocol was followed. She waited until after Flynn's testimony before turning to the court clerk. "Deputy Rhodes," she said, voice crisp as polished stone. "Step forward." The room held its breath as Rhodes, still wearing his badge, sweated under the bench's lights. Elena's eyes never flicked to his shorn scalp. "You will state your full name for the record." He swallowed. "Darren Rhodes. How many complaints have been filed against you in your 17 years here?" Rhodes shook his head. I'm not certain. Official records confirm 12 formal grievances," Elena continued. "All dismissed without investigation." Murmurs rippled across the gallery. Rhodes tried to sputter excuses, but Elena struck again. "You assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse security area. That act constitutes a criminal offense. Bailiff Kim, place Deputy Rhodes under arrest for abuse of power. Remove his badge, cuff him, and escort him to the holding cell." 2 silent officers rose. Rhodes's face blanched as his weapon and ID were stripped away. He protested, "You can't do this." But found no ally among the stunned spectators. Elena's gavel came down, court stands in recess until further notice. In that charged moment, the courthouse ceased to be a fortress for the privileged. It became a chamber of accountability. And Judge Elena Grant, humiliated moments before, now presided over her own vindication. When Judge Grant reconvened the hearing, the gallery was packed with new faces, neighborhood activists, clergy, civil rights attorneys in muted suits. On her left, Pastor Gabriel Stone stood among them, arms folded in quiet solidarity. Elena acknowledged the crowd with a measured nod, then called forward her next witness, Mr. Harold Jennings, a retired railway engineer who had been brutalized during a peaceful rally last spring. Jennings, a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s, described how officers shoved him to the ground, fracturing his wrist as he carried a sign reading, "Justice for All." His testimony was calm but heart-rending. "I begged for paramedics," he recalled, voice thick. "They told me to tough it out." Elena did not interrupt, she listened as Jennings's account cleaved the courtroom's previous tension like a wave. When he finished, she offered a quiet, "Thank you for your courage." Before the next witness could be sworn in, a knock sounded at the chamber door. A serious-looking attorney in a charcoal suit entered, flashing credentials from the Office of Civil Law Enforcement. "Judge Grant," he said, "I've been dispatched regarding this morning's security screening incident. Under Title 18, your assault constitutes a civil rights violation. We're opening a formal investigation into Magnolia County Courthouse staff and the handling of prior complaints." Elena inclined her head. "Proceed as necessary," she replied. The attorney left, and a buzz spread through the courtroom. Reporters exchanged hurried whispers, "It's federal now." Seizing the moment, Elena called for record supervisor Maya Lee, a meticulous clerk who had maintained the courthouse's internal files for over a decade. Lee took the stand, adjusting her spectacles. "During my tenure, I recorded at least 12 complaints against Bailiff Rhodes," she testified. Each was dismissed by internal memo, often labeled unsubstantiated or resolved. Supervisors cautioned against pursuing them, citing maintaining public confidence. A murmur rose. Her bosses had buried countless grievances to preserve the courthouse's reputation. Now those same supervisors were under scrutiny by federal investigators. The courtroom doors opened again as uniformed agents from the Civil Rights Office arrived to observe proceedings. Elena watched them take notes as she directed her clerk, "Enter into the record all documents related to these suppressed complaints." Then she addressed the audience. "Magnolia County Courthouse will no longer protect predators behind badges. This hearing marks the beginning of transparency." Outside, protesters and clergy gathered on the marble steps, holding signs that referenced the case, "No more secret shields," and "Accountability now." Pastor Stone stepped to a microphone. "The judge has shown us that truth cannot be hidden. We stand with her, and with every person who was denied justice." Inside, Elena Grant resumed questioning the next officer, her tone steely. But the courthouse had already shifted. What began as an internal misconduct hearing had become a watershed for civil rights enforcement, and the ripple effect would soon engulf every courthouse in the district. Just after lunchtime, defense counsel rose with a parchment folder in hand. "Your Honor," he began in measured tones, "in light of this morning's assault and the ensuing federal inquiry, we move for your recusal on grounds of perceived bias." A uniform hush followed. Elena Grant remained seated, her eyes on the attorney. "You suggest that because I experienced an assault at my own security checkpoint today, I cannot fairly adjudicate this case." His trimmed beard twitched. "The public perception of impartiality is at risk." Elena tapped her gavel once. "Let me be perfectly clear. Impartiality is not the absence of experience, but the presence of integrity. My duty is to apply the law, today, tomorrow, and after every challenge." She leaned forward. "If you doubt my ability, you may renew this motion on appeal." For this courtroom, we proceed. A ripple of surprise swept through the gallery. Defense counsel sank back into his chair. Elena's clerk then brought forward Maya Lee once more. this time to expose the names behind the suppressed complaints. Lee distributed a binder containing memos signed by Judge Gregory Hale, Elena's former mentor and the previous presiding magistrate. Elena's jaw tightened as Lee testified. Judge Hale instructed security to handle difficult individuals quietly, to avoid undermining public confidence. Each time a complaint named Bailiff Rhodes, he was protected rather than disciplined. A collective gasp rose. Attorneys leaned forward. Journalists stood up to scribble. Defense counsel's face flushed. Elena's voice was cold but quiet. This was not a mistake. It was a choice. She directed her clerk to file these new materials as evidence and announced, Judge Hale will be summoned to testify on his role in suppressing these reports. But her reform did not stop at exposure. Rising from the bench, she produced a draft policy, branded the Grant Mandate, that required mandatory anti-bias training for all courthouse staff, psychological evaluations before and during service, annual audits of internal complaints by an independent reviewer, whistleblower protections for employees reporting misconduct. Holding the document aloft, she declared, effective immediately, Magnolia County Courthouse will implement these reforms. I will forward this mandate to the State Judicial Council and request adoption across all circuits. The courtroom erupted in silent applause, an undercurrent of hope rippling through a space once notorious for secrecy. Defense counsel sat stunned. Even Bailiff Rhodes, remanded to custody, looked up at the bench as though seeing a force far greater than any badge. Elena returned to her seat, her gavel poised over a new era of accountability. By mid-afternoon, news of the Grant Mandate had spread beyond Magnolia's borders. Reporters called for interviews, civic groups requested copies of the policy. Yet inside the courthouse, Elena knew systemic change demanded hard evidence, and she intended to gather it. She convened a closed-door session with Lieutenant Carla Jenkins of the State Civil Rights Division, who arrived with a leather satchel of documents. Judge Grant, Jenkins began, our preliminary review of courthouse records reveals a pattern, over 50 internal complaints in the past decade, many involving use of force or racial profiling. None proceeded beyond cursory note-taking. Elena's gaze sharpened. Whose names appear most frequently? Jenkins unwrapped a bundle of dockets. Deputy Rhodes, Supervisory Sergeant Myers, and 3 former bailiffs now retired. Even last year's interim chief marshal, David Crawford. A map of suppression emerged. Memos that routed complaints into sealed files, emails instructing clerks to close without action, and performance reviews praising unflappable handling of sensitive matters, despite multiple civilian allegations. Armed with this data, Elena reopened the public hearing. The gallery swelled, community leaders, civil rights lawyers, even legislators in attendance. Across from the bench, defense counsel paled as records were entered into the public record. Elena allowed Maya Lee to summarize the buried cases: women forced to remove headscarves, elderly veterans shoved aside, schoolteachers threatened with arrest, all quietly dismissed. Then she called Captain Leonard Myers, once a pillar of courthouse decorum. His uniform was immaculate, his posture textbook. But under fierce questioning, Myers admitted signing off on 5 dismissals, writing, no corroborating evidence, despite eyewitness accounts. When asked why he never escalated the claims, he mumbled, I was following orders to preserve the institution's reputation. Elena did not mince words, an institution that protects abuse is itself abusive. Then, turning to Jenkins, she requested a statewide audit of every courthouse under the district's jurisdiction. If Magnolia County has protected predators for years, she said, we must ensure every county does the same. Jenkins rose, nodding. Already in motion, Your Honor. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted from shock to resolve. Community advocates who had once felt powerless now whispered plans, forming watchdog committees, organizing town hall forums, recruiting attorneys to assist future complainants. Outside, Pastor Stone greeted constituents on the steps, handing out flyers for an upcoming Justice Vigil in support of Judge Grant's reforms. Elena, meanwhile, retreated to her chambers to draft a formal request to the State Judicial Council. Adopt the grant mandate as binding policy statewide. She paused over the letter, recalling the pile of her own hair in that cold screening room. The machine of suppression had been revealed, but dismantling it would require constant vigilance. That evening, as the sun set beyond the courthouse spire, Elena Grant reviewed her day's work. The road ahead was long, and powerful interests would resist. But for the first time, the corridors of power echoed not with silence, but with the unmistakable hum of accountability, and she intended to keep that hum alive. Word of the statewide audit and the grant mandate triggered both applause and ire. Within 24 hours, hate mail flooded Judge Grant's chambers, thick envelopes bearing threats and insults. Similar intimidation targeted her allies. Officer Leo Chan, the young deputy who had refused to help Rhodes, found a dead rat pinned to his locker. Record supervisor Maya Lee discovered her home's security cameras disabled overnight. Yet the seed of reform had taken root. Jenkins dispatched internal affairs teams to every county courthouse in the district. Within days, 3 bailiffs were suspended, 2 court clerks placed on leave, and 1 retired judge resigned under a cloud, each linked to the buried complaints. In Magnolia County itself, courageous staff members came forward to testify under oath. On the courthouse steps, the newly formed Justice Circle held its first public rally. Led by Pastor Stone, families of past victims shared their stories. One speaker, Ms. Latoya Newman, described how her teenage son was pinned face-first against a metal detector last year for appearing nervous. The crowd, young and old, black and white, cheered when Leo Chan stepped forward. I chose integrity over silence, he told them. And you can, too. Judge Grant, arriving in plain clothes, took the microphone. Today we honor those who refuse to look the other way. Our fight isn't over. This mandate demands follow-through, accountability, and cultural change. But I believe in this community's strength. Together, we will ensure no one else is forced to endure what I endured. The next morning, the county commissioners removed security chief from Rhodes's title and initiated his formal termination. A public apology was read over the courthouse loudspeaker, though it rang hollow to those still healing. Concurrently, Grant's chambers received word from the State Judicial Council. A temporary task force would fast-track adoption of her anti-bias training across the circuit. Back in the courtroom, daily operations began adapting. Bailiffs wore name badges with large print and photo IDs. Security screenings were moved to open-air kiosks with live video feeds to the clerk's office. Anti-bias seminars replaced routine staff meetings. Even Judge Grant noticed an unfamiliar lightness in the corridors. Staff greeted each other by name, offered quiet nods of respect. Still, the backlash simmered. Anonymous posters appeared on courthouse bulletin boards accusing Grant of playing politics. A prominent attorney penned an op-ed decrying judge-led activism. But public sentiment had shifted irrevocably. Local radio hosts opened their calls for stories of courthouse abuse. County lawyers reported a surge in clients with similar grievances. Judge Grant pressed on. She convened monthly justice roundtables, inviting community leaders, clergy, and county officials to review progress. Each session ended with actionable pledges, additional body camera funding, a hotline for whistleblowers, and a promise to publish all screening room incidents online. And so, even as threats lingered in the dark, Magnolia County's courthouses began to change, one training session, one sympathetic deputy, one courageous clerk at a time. Judge Elena Grant knew the journey was far from complete, but she took comfort in the first bright shoots of accountability breaking through decades of silence. News of the Grant mandate and Magnolia County's sweeping reforms soon reached beyond state lines. A leading national legal journal ran a feature headlined, "The Judge Who Changed the Courthouse." Invitations arrived, panel discussions at law schools, webinars for judicial ethics committees, and a keynote slot at the American Bar Association's annual conference. Judge Grant accepted sparingly. She valued substance over spotlight, but when she spoke, her words carried quiet authority. At University Central Law School, she addressed 200 students, integrity isn't defined by the titles we hold, but by the moments we refuse to look away. Her lecture hall overflowed. Standing room attendees included young black students who scribbled furiously as she recounted her own ordeal and the subsequent legal reforms. Afterward, dozens waited to shake her hand, some teared up, others voiced relief at seeing a system finally confronting its own faults. Meanwhile, Officer Leo Chan and Record Supervisor Maya Lee traveled to neighboring counties, sharing best practices and co-leading workshops titled, From Silence to Service. Maya's presentation on transparent complaint tracking software drew enthusiastic applause from court administrators hungry for change. Leo's first-hand account of refusing to cover for misconduct inspired new recruits to pledge honesty over loyalty. Back home, Magnolia County held its first Justice Symposium, hosted in the courthouse rotunda. Panels included clergy, civil rights lawyers, and even former detainees. Grant moderated the session on Building Trust, accepting tough questions from critics who feared rapid change. She listened intently, then responded with measured candor, urging patience and vigilance. National media soon followed. A primetime news magazine aired her story, profiling the couple who fended off threats to their home, the clerk who quietly saved buried complaints, and the young intern, Claire Fox, now a first-year law student inspired by Grant's example. In a final segment, Grant walked viewers through the newly installed kiosk and announced, "A courthouse should be more than a building of marble, it must be a beacon of fairness." Meanwhile, grassroots groups formed Justice Seedlings, a non-profit to support whistleblowers and train community members in legal advocacy. Grants and donations poured in from across the country. Retired judges volunteered to mentor young attorneys. Even at the federal level, legislators cited Magnolia County as a model in drafting new oversight legislation. Through it all, Judge Grant remained focused on her courtroom's next reforms, expanding survivor support services and establishing a civilian review board for courthouse complaints. But she also allowed herself a rare moment of pride. Systems could change, hierarchies could be challenged, and one person's refusal to stay silent could spark a movement that grew well beyond county lines. A year after the humiliating shearing in the security room, Magnolia County's courthouses bore little resemblance to their former selves. The Grant mandate was codified statewide, every bailiff and marshal underwent annual bias training, and civilian oversight boards convened quarterly to review screening room complaints. At the inauguration of the Judicial Integrity Center, a repurposed wing of the original courthouse, Judge Grant addressed an audience of civil rights leaders, lawmakers, and former detainees. "We built this center to shine light where there was darkness. It stands as proof that justice thrives when the powerless are heard." Inside, interactive exhibits showcased the 12 original complaints against Darren Rhodes, video testimony, and the electric shears now displayed behind glass, no longer a tool of violence, but a reminder that dignity must never be taken for granted. Officer Leo Chan, now a sergeant, led weekly de-escalation workshops for deputies across the state. He and Record Supervisor Maya Lee co-authored a training manual, Truth in the Halls, which was adopted by 3 neighboring states. Meanwhile, intern-turned-law student Claire Fox clerked for Judge Grant, drafting proposals to extend anti-bias reforms to traffic stops and probation offices. In Clayton Middle School, where Celeste once spoke to wide-eyed children, students studied her case as part of their civics curriculum. One 8th grader's essay, Judge Grant, Standing Tall, won statewide recognition, echoing the teacher's note. Her story reminds us that courage can be quiet yet unshakable. Even at the federal level, legislation inspired by Magnolia County's model advanced in Congress. The Judicial Transparency Act passed by a narrow margin, mandating public reporting of all internal complaints in every district courthouse nationwide. Judge Grant was invited to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, imparting one final reminder: reform isn't a single verdict or a solitary law. It's the daily choice to shine truth on the darkest corners of our institutions. Back home, on a crisp autumn morning, Grant walked the courthouse steps again, this time greeted by custodians offering respectful nods and clerks greeting her by name. No forced smiles, no hushed coughs, just genuine warmth. At the entrance, a small plaque now read, in honor of Judge Elena Grant, who turned personal indignity into public dignity. She paused, placing her hand on the cold bronze letters. The echo of her own heels on the marble steps was steady, confident. The courthouse no longer felt like a fortress against the people, but a bridge between power and accountability. And as she disappeared behind the doors, there was no question that justice, in Magnolia County and beyond, would never be the same.